Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Michaela Rini, and for anyone who's new to joining us, this is our free monthly masterclass. I'll be live this morning on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So wherever you're joining us from, welcome. And if you're watching us on replay, hello. And I hope you enjoy this particular session because it is very close to my heart. And I feel like it's something that a lot of people are talking about at the moment in their workplaces. There's a lot of teams, a lot of contributors, leaders, different people having to navigate change right now. So we thought it'd be the perfect time to talk about change, how we communicate change, and how we make sure that it is as effective as it can be. So we're going to get started, which we have got about 30 to 40 minutes together this morning. So let's get cracking and we'll get into what we have planned for the session. So change is an interesting one, isn't it, for everyone? We're going to be talking about change today and specifically why it goes wrong sometimes. And I don't believe that's because the change itself is the problem. I actually think the challenge we have when it comes to change within our workplaces is how it actually gets communicated is not the most effective. So we really wanted to focus in on that today. As I say, it is a close one to my heart. I've been through a lot of change myself personally in the last couple of years, and I've been sitting with this topic in a really different way because of that change that I've been through myself. So I'm bringing all of that into this session today, and I really recognize from my team and I's work with the thousands of people that we interact with across different workplaces, just how many people are dealing with change right now at work. So it's going to be a really practical session as ever. It's going to be very real. And by the end, hopefully you'll have some clear things you can take straight back to your team and to your workplace. So let's get started. Let's get into the detail of today. So humans, as I said, I want to start with this reframe because I think we've been telling ourselves the wrong story. Yeah, we talk about humans not being that great at change. We talk about change like it's this terrible thing that us as humans really resist doing. And like people are fundamentally wired to dig their heels in and refuse to move or to change or to adapt. But genuinely, that's not what I see play out in the workplaces that we work in. So we mainly work with engineering, manufacturing, technology businesses, but I've worked with lots of different sectors as well over the years. And we've worked with I think it's certainly over 10,000 people now within those different environments. And it's not what the evidence shows either of how people actually adapt and work with change. So if we think back to 2020, I know none of us really want to go there. We want to wish it never happened. But COVID, overnight, literally overnight, millions of people changed how they worked, how they lived, how they connected with the people that they loved. We had no textbook on how to do this well. There was no kind of manual that would help us understand how to navigate this. We certainly didn't have a 6-month transition plan on how to do that really effectively. We just adapted because we had to. And because humans are actually remarkably good at change when we understand what is happening and why. They're the two fundamental parts. When we understand what is happening and we understand why it's happening and the impact of that particular change, we are remarkably good at getting behind that change. So if we're not bad at change, what do we think the actual problem is? Yeah. So if anyone's on live, feel free to drop in the chat if there's anything in particular you think is the challenge around change. But I believe that the big issue that we're having is what I see time and time again in organizations, teams, people going through change, is that we're not great at communicating it. So the change itself isn't what breaks people, in my opinion. It's the silence around it. It's the ambiguity that happens. It's the gaps in communication that people will then fill with their own stories because they haven't been given the detail. And almost always, those stories that we fill the gaps in they're much worse than reality of the situation. Because as human beings, we all have a negativity bias. So we're actively attuned and looking for evidence day in, day out to back up our negative assumptions. So, in the context of our workplaces, it's those announcements that happen that lands before any line manager has been briefed on how to handle the follow-up questions that they may get from their team. It's the months of uncertainty with no real reassurance. It's the narrative gap that rumours start to fill in our workplaces, and often those rumours turn to gossip, and we know that gossip can become really toxic from a cultural perspective and doesn't really help any of us understand what's really going on and how we adapt to it. So I've sat in rooms with teams going through significant organizational change, change that is really overwhelming for people. And I've watched what happens when that communication breaks down. People stop trusting, People end up feeling like they're not getting the information that they need to really understand the change or move forward with that change. So what happens is when they distrust the system or the people who are communicating it, they stop engaging. The change that needs to happen ends up stalling or being a lot less efficient, shall we say, than it could be. And I don't believe that's because people can't handle that change, but it's because they're never being really properly brought through with that change. And that's actually not a change problem. I'm saying the word change a lot, right? That's not a change problem. That's a communication problem. And I would argue that 95% of our issues in our workplaces are directly linked back to some form of communication breakdown. And that's where the challenges come. So let me be a little bit more specific in the next slide about what this is actually costing us when it comes to change. So these are just some of the things that we see happen time and time again with the teams, the organizations that we work with. So because I think sometimes leaders, we do underestimate what the cost is of getting the communication wrong with our change. People leap into communication about what's going to happen without really thinking about the impact on those around us. And when that communication breaks down during change, it's those rumors that fill the space that clarity should have been occupying. And I mean this quite literally, because people will create their own narrative. You'll have seen it happen in your own organization, in your own team. We fill those gaps. And as I said before, those stories that we create to fill those gaps, they're almost never the optimistic ones. So that trust erodes really quickly. And once people feel like they're not being told the truth, or that some information is being managed rather than shared with them, it's really hard to get that trust back. And that's where engagement drops. People start protecting themselves rather than doing the best work. And it's really, really distracting, isn't it, going through change? Because when we're going through some form of change, how many people do you think truly within your team, within your organization, your clients, whoever it might be, how many of those people realistically are doing their best work? I'm not sure that number is high. I think we become deeply inefficient when people are distracted and when change isn't managed effectively. And then the change, as I say, stalls. The thing you needed to happen, the thing that the organization needed to move forward on, it gets really stuck in like that really sticky, messy mud of poor communication. But the really good news is that all of this is preventable. None of this has to happen. That's the great news. We can fix this stuff too. And that's the bit I guess I get sometimes quite frustrated with when I'm working with organizations or when my team is, because this stuff is preventable. And I think, unfortunately, because of the pace of change, because of the pace in which we're all now working, we are unable to often think about, plan, do the communication around change really effectively. And so it has this huge knock-on effect, but it is preventable. And I do think as individuals, we can all be accountable for how we manage that communication around it as well. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about next. Okay, so when everything feels uncertain, when change is happening around your team are looking to you. Yeah, not for all the answers. They don't expect you to have every possible answer that they might have a question for right now. They're not looking for that kind of perfectly polished message. They're looking for you to calm the system. Yeah. So your energy, how you communicate, your presence, all of that signals to your team whether this is something to panic about or something that we can all navigate together. And that is both a significant responsibility, in my opinion, on anyone in the workplace, and actually a really empowering one as well, because it means you have the influence over how your team can experience some of that change. Yeah, you can't influence every part, but you certainly can influence more of it than you might realize. So I'm going to talk about how we use this influence well. Yeah, so when we know this, we can do something about it. That's the dream, isn't it? As ever. Okay, so I want to name, before we get into what to do, sometimes I find it really easy to talk about what not to do, because these are the instincts that feel right in the moment, but don't always get the outcomes that you want to. So the first thing I want to talk about is waiting until you have all of the answers. Yeah. I understand why some leaders do this. You don't want to create more panic. You want to be able to answer the questions that everyone has, but waiting, that creates that gap we talk about. So I really encourage you to share what you know, even if at this point in time it is incomplete. You can certainly share that with your team, that you don't have the full picture, but you can share with them what you do know right now. And as you know more information, you'll continue to share that with them so that people get really clear on what is happening and when. The next thing that I see sometimes happening is when we soften the message so much that actually people don't necessarily know what you mean anymore. And I think there's a real difference between being kind and being very vague with people. Yeah. So we do want you to be honest and human. In fact, you have to be both of those things. So when you soften a message to protect maybe people in your team's feelings or to prevent some sort of panic from people, you actually often end up confusing people instead. So clear is kind here. Get real clarity on your message and don't soften it to the point that people actually don't really understand what you mean or where it's going. Yeah. The more people can understand the why, understand what is going on around the change and the communication, the better. One thing that I really consistently still see happening is where people get briefing on change at the same time. Yeah. Including managers, leaders in the organization. And this one I think is quite a big one, because if your line managers find out about a change at the same moment as their teams, I don't think they can support people effectively, because actually they might be in shock themselves. They might be processing the information. They might be trying to figure out what it means for them personally, never mind the rest of their team. So please brief your managers first. Give those people time to process the information, give themselves time to ask questions that they need to, and also give them the questions that they're likely to get asked. Yeah, and help set them up with the answer to those so that when their teams do find out, it doesn't feel like such a shocked process because the managers are ready for it. And actually, that really calms the rest of the organization as well. But that is one thing I don't see us do well in our workplaces. So really set them up, your leaders, your managers, to be that calm person in the room. But to do that, they need more information and they need it much sooner. They don't get it often. Something I get quite frustrated about, as you can probably tell. The next thing that I do see happening is that when there might be nothing new to say, yeah, or you feel like there's nothing really of interest or new to share with the rest of your organization, your team, group, whatever it looks like, the instinct is often to say nothing. But silence sometimes to the rest of your team, your organization, can appear to be a bit like avoidance. So regular communication, even just to say, I don't have an update yet, but I haven't forgotten about you. This matters enormously. Yeah. People will remember how you communicated this change. They'll actually remember how you communicated the change more than what the actual change it was itself. So really think about how you have that consistent, regular communication happening, even when it feels like to you that you are repeating yourself. Communicate it again. There's loads of research now that says that people need to hear something 27 times before they take action or change behavior. So you've really got to think about this when we communicate. It might feel repetitive, but actually to the people listening, they're picking up different things out of each time you communicate with them. So even when you don't have that update, just play back to people where we're up to, what is happening, and the fact that that update is not yet there. It matters enormously. People will then start to trust that you are telling them what you know when you know it. Yeah, that's really important. And the final one is don't pretend that things are better than they are. So don't fudge it. Yeah, don't give people any false hope to avoid a difficult conversation. Everyone around you during this change is watching how you show up, and people can tell. Yeah, they can always tell when we're fudging it. So don't do it. Don't give any false hope. Just be really clear with people, even when it is the difficult stuff to hear. It's actually even more important to be clear, to be open, to be honest in those moments. That's where people build trust and also get the information that they really need, right? Because change isn't straightforward, and we do need information so that we can get more comfortable with what's coming. I know this is a mantra that I love and repeat regularly from the wonderful Brené Brown, but what does good actually look like when we think about our communication around change? And I use these 3 words all the time. So clear, kind, honest about what you don't know. So clear means no ambiguity in your message. Say the thing you need to say. Don't dress it up so much that people leave the conversation unsure of what has just happened. Yeah. Kind means you deliver it absolutely with empathy. You understand that the information that you're sharing lands in a real human being's life. Yeah. So give people that space to react. Don't just rush through the communication to get it over with. Give people the space to respond. Give people the space to go away, reflect, think about it, then come back with questions. Don't expect everyone to have all of the questions all at once that they might be thinking about. Give people that space to do it. That's how we really demonstrate our empathy in these moments. Be honest about what you don't know. So this is the one that feels most uncomfortable sometimes, but I think is one of the most important. So saying things like, I don't have the answer yet, is not a sign of weakness in communication or a sign of weakness in your change management beautiful program. It's a sign of integrity, and people respect it far more than the polished answer or polished non-answer, like a politician. We won't get into that. But that kind of non-answer that people get is just really unhelpful. But the combination of these 3 things is what builds trust during change. It's not about certainty. It's not about perfect answers. It's about trust. And to do that, we need that clear, kind, and honest communication. So remember about those 3 things when you are working through how you support people through change and how you communicate effectively. So I want to bring in here just something that I think completely changes how we think about communicating change, and it comes from the brilliant Simon Sinek and the law of diffusion in innovation. Yeah. And what Simon basically talks about in this theory is that in any group of people, there are roughly 2.5% of people within that group, within that team, within that population or organization that are classed as innovators. Yeah. They're already in. They love new things. They don't need convincing when change is happening. Yeah. They love it. They thrive on change. Yeah. People who say, I love change. I love that dynamic, that pace. These are your innovators. Yeah. They're already in. They love new things. They don't need convincing about the change that's coming. Then you've got about 13.5% of people who are what I would call your early adopters. Yeah. So they're pretty open. They're quite curious people. They'll get behind something in change in their organization if they believe in it. And together, those two populations, hold on one second, have some water. Lots of talking already today. And together, these different populations create 16% of your team or organization. And what Simon Sinek says, which I think is brilliant, is that you don't need to convince the whole room, the whole team, the whole organization. When you're managing through change and when you're communicating change, what you need to spend your time doing is reaching that 16% of people first. Yeah. So that's where that magic gap is. Yeah. This magic gap is the combination of our innovators and our early adopters. Yeah. That's what we're looking at. This magic gap here is what we're focusing on in our change communication. Because once that population of people are moving, the rest will follow. Not because you force them to do it, but because the people that they trust in their teams, in their organization, the people they're engaging with day to day, they're already doing it. Yeah, they're the people they trust. Those people are doing it. So therefore, they follow suit. So most leaders, when we communicate change, we try and bring everyone along into that change all at once. Yeah, we stand up in an all hands call or town hall meeting and we make that big announcement. And then we almost act quite baffled when 2/3 of the room seem resistant to that change or maybe just a bit flat. But that resistance isn't always about the change itself. It's about where people sit on this curve. Excuse me. So the late majority, the skeptics, they need to see it working before they'll move. Yeah. So before they want to get into this change, be part of it, they need to see it working. That's the difference. They need social proof. They need to watch their colleagues go first, then they'll follow. So when you're communicating change, I really want you to think about this curve. Find your early adopters, bring them in as early as possible into your communication about this change. Give them information before the wider group. Make them part of the conversation, not just recipients of it, and let them be the ones who say to their colleagues, actually, I've heard about this, and here's what I think. Yeah, so powerful when that is coming from peers, network, the people that you're working with day to day. That's how change actually spreads in an organization. It's not from the top down, it's person to person. Get those people behind it, get them to be part of it so that it is done with them, not to them. That's the key. Your early adopters, those people who are your innovators, get them hooked in, and then over time, the rest will follow. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? I know it's more complex than that, but this is a good reminder of how you plan your communication and how you plan your change process. And I don't see many organizations doing this. So I do think this is something that we can all reflect on and think about in our communication, whether that is big, huge change in our organization or just quite small stuff. It's relevant for both. So every single person in your team has a different map of the world. So change lands very differently for everyone. We all have different life experiences, different relationships with uncertainty. We even have different things at stake personally. So, what feels really manageable to you might feel absolutely terrifying to someone else. What you experience as really exciting change might land as a threat. So, to someone who's been through difficult change before and has kind of negative feelings about that change because of what they experienced. So this doesn't mean you communicate wildly different to every individual, but it does mean you need to lead with empathy. You make space for different reactions. You don't dismiss the person who seems to be struggling with something that might feel quite straightforward to you. So I want you to ask yourself, how might this land for the people on my team? Yeah. So whenever we're communicating any change, how might this actually land for people? Not just how does it feel to you or to your colleagues who've been talking about this change in some boardroom for months and months on end. How might it actually land for the people around you? What concerns or worries might they have? Start there and then start planning communication around it. That will help you really think about the questions, concerns those people may have. Okay, let's get into how we do this. So let's talk about some of the hard conversations. You know, the conversations that you know you need to have, but you might be putting off. So things like announcing redundancies. It might be restructures that are going on in your organization. It might be a change that's going to impact someone's role in a way that they won't like. Yeah, it could be a decision that might have been made above you that you don't really fully agree with, but you have to communicate it to your team anyway. These are the moments where leaders tend to either over-prepare, script every word until it sounds quite robotic, or they avoid the conversation entirely until they absolutely have to do it. Or worse, they default to someone else in the organization to share the messages. I see this play out where managers, leaders default to people and culture, HR teams, people team, whatever you call your function that looks after the people in your organization. Often we default to them. And I know from the experience of people in HR teams, that isn't the way that we want to do it. We really want to empower our leaders and managers to handle these conversations and these changes as best as possible. And both of those approaches, where we either default to other people, do something quite scripted and robotic, or avoid the conversation, they actually cause more damage than having that open and honest conversation would have done. And what I know from experience, and I've had to have some of the hardest conversations as a leader that you possibly can have. So things like redundancies, closing a business, huge, big changes that affect my team, my organization, my clients, everyone around us. People don't need you to be perfect. That's what I've learned. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be really present with them. They need you to be open and transparent. They need to feel like you actually care about what this means for them. Yeah, they need to understand that you are thinking about the impact on them. You're leading with empathy. You're demonstrating that you understand how challenged this is for them. Yeah. You don't have to have all the answers. That's the good news. But you do need to show up. And sometimes what you have to share with people, they're not going to like it. Yeah, they don't want to hear it. And yet you still have to share it. And that's the hardest thing sometimes. And it's okay to be open about how uncomfortable that might be for you, or that you don't have every answer yet. But you do need to do it. We can't avoid this stuff. It's so, so important. And I want to say something that I think sometimes gets missed in some of this. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. I want to say something that I think often gets missed in a lot of change management conversations. And I speak of this from absolute personal experience. You are not going to get this perfectly right. None of us do. I've made huge mistakes in how I've communicated change before. I've had circumstances where I've gone too quiet when I should have spoken up. I've softened a message when I should have been absolutely crystal clear with people. I've certainly waited, I think, sometimes for a bit more information or certainty when I should have just shared what the uncertainty was. And I've had to give myself grace for that, actually, because the alternative is beating yourself up, catastrophizing every conversation that you've handled imperfectly. And in my opinion, that doesn't serve you or your team during any change or challenge that you might be working through. What matters is that you keep showing up, that you stay in the conversation, that you don't go silent because you're worried about saying the wrong thing. So imperfect communication that is delivered with openness, transparency, and care, I think always will beat polished silence or polished scripted non-communication. You know, those kind of communications where we've probably all had them in organizations where they're saying one thing, but you know that there's more to the story. Yeah, we don't want that. I'd much rather have imperfect communication, but one that is delivered with that openness, that transparency and care. So I want to leave you with, as we go into the kind of final sections of today, some questions to take back into your organization and to your team that I think will help you really get some clarity on what is happening right now and how you might be managing this change. So I want you to just take a moment to think about your own team. There's 4 questions that I'd love you to have a sit with. And I want you to just give a moment to actually think about your own team and your own situation. So grab a pen if you've got one. The first question is there a change happening right now or one that might be coming up that your team doesn't have enough information about? Not because you're withholding it, but because you haven't found the moment to share it or you're waiting for more certainty before you do. What do you think you could share right now, even if it is incomplete? What could that look like? The second question, if you have managers or leaders in your team, have they been briefed appropriately? Do they know what's coming before this communication lands? Do they have what they need to answer the questions that they're undoubtedly going to get from the people in their teams? Yeah. Because if the answer is no, I think that's the first thing to fix. Get that really crystal clear with your leaders and managers and make sure that they're prepared. The third question is, where have you gone quiet? Is there a conversation you've been putting off? Is there a message you've been drafting but not actually sending? Is there a team meeting where you've maybe avoided bringing something up? Name it. Just for yourself, what is the thing you haven't said out loud yet that you know you need to? Have a think on that one. The fourth question is, what does your team need to hear from you this week? I'm not thinking here like this full, grand, beautiful communication plan, not that perfectly crafted message. Just what do they actually need to hear from you? What would calm the system? What would help them feel less uncertain? Because that, I believe, is where you need to start. Yeah. What does your team need to hear from you this week? Get really, really clear on that. Okay, so these are the final little takeaways that I would love you to have a think about that you can do differently from today. Let's bring it all together. So the first one is share what you know, even when it's incomplete. So partial information delivered honestly is way, way, way better than silence. So tell people what you know, but also what you don't know. The second one is brief your managers first. Always. Always, always, always. So before any announcement, before any all hands call, they are your first line of support and they can't do that job if they're not hearing the news, if they're hearing the news at the same time as everyone else. So give them a heads up, brief them within an inch of their lives, and make sure those people have the questions and the answers to those questions so that they can best support the people around them. 3, saying I don't know yet out loud is not a sign of weakness. It's one of the most trust-building things a leader can do during uncertainty. So lean into it, don't avoid it. 4 is keep communicating, even when there's no update. Yeah. So a quick message that says, nothing's changed yet, but I haven't forgotten about you, and I will come back to you again on this date. It does more than you think it does. Yeah. It keeps people connected in. It keeps people knowing, understanding that when you do have information, you're going to share it with them. Number 5 is be clear and kind. You don't have to choose one or the other. This is the thing I want you to remember the most. The kindest thing you can do for your team is to be honest with them. Yeah. Clarity absolutely is care. So be open, be transparent with the information that you have available. Don't avoid it. Keep it flowing. Keep it nice and straightforward for your team so they can get behind the change that is coming. So that's the end of the content for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending those 37 minutes with me this morning. I genuinely hope that some of this has given you some food for thought and some ideas that are useful to take back to your team today. If this has landed for you and you're thinking, I actually want a bit more of this kind of learning, knowledge, ideas, I really want to tell you about something called Starts With Us, and it's our leadership community. And it's where leaders like you, contributors in our workplace, you don't have to have leader or manager in your job title to get benefit from this, but it's people like you can get ongoing support, not just one of these one-off masterclasses. So every month within our community, we have live workshops, group coaching, and a resource library that actually is built full of real stuff, the messy, human, complicated parts of leading people. And if that sounds like something that might be useful to you, drop me a message, reply to our newsletter that we send out, and we'll tell you more about it. And if you found today really useful, do share it with someone in your network who is probably navigating change right now and could do with hearing some of this. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. You are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. There's also our mailing list here if you want to connect on that newsletter. And if you want more information on Starts With Us, which is our leadership community, you can use the QR code that is on screen right now. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'm excited to see you again next month. Thank you so much.